the Zambia national anthem. Your Excellencies, in line with the tradition of Zambia, which is a Christian nation, may I kindly request that we bow down in a word of prayer. Let us pray, shall we? Eternal loving Father, we are so grateful that this morning you have brought the heads of states and government and representatives and delegates to come on this auspicious occasion as we look at energy and climate change. God, you created the world, but you gave the responsibility of looking after the earth to man. And therefore, as people gather in this wonderful occasion, may you give them the wisdom that you gave to Solomon, that they may be able to deliberate intelligently and come out with solution that will give us a way forward. So we ask that you grace this wonderful occasion in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, as we all agree by saying Amen. We may be seated. At this particular moment in time, may I now hand over to the Acting Secretary General, Mr. Pinzi, the Acting Secretary General, sir. Thank you.
Please, photographers, could you please move to the sides?
Maintenant que les photographes nous ont laissé la place nette, nous allons commencer notre cérémonie d'ouverture.
Towards the back, we can begin our opening ceremony.
Très court, étant donné
It is going to be a brief one because we're already running late and we have a
Your Excellency,
busy program.
Mr. Edgar Chabwa Lungu, President of the Republic of Zambia. Excellence, Monsieur Idriss Déby Itno, Président de la République du Tchad, Président de l'Union africaine. Your Excellency,
Paul
President of the
Kagame,
Republic of Rwanda.
President of
Your Excellency,
the Republic of Rwanda.
Professor Yemi Osinbajo, Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Your Excellency, Mr. Kassim Majaliwa, Prime Minister of the United Republic of Tanzania. Your Excellency, Dr. Carlos Agostinho do Rosario, Prime Minister of the Republic of Mozambique. Your Excellency, Dr. Sarah Nasser, Minister of International Cooperation of the Arab Republic of Egypt, official representative of His Excellency Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, President of the Arab Republic of Egypt. Your Excellency, Madame Marie-Thérèse Winifred Robinson, former President of Ireland. Your Excellency, Mr. Horst Kohler, former President of Germany. Your Excellency, Mr. John Kufuor, former President of Ghana. Your Excellency, Mr. Kofi Annan, former Secretary General of the United Nations, who is absent, but we had to mention his illustrious name. Your Excellency, Dr. Anthony Mothai Maruping, Commissioner for Economic Affairs of Representative of the Chairperson of the African Union Commission. Your Excellency, Dr. Carlos Lopez, Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Honorable Ministers of the Government of the Republic of Zambia. Your Excellencies, Heads of Mission of the Diplomatic Corps in Zambia. Honorable Mr. Alexander Bwalya Chikwanda, MP, Minister of Finance of the Republic of Zambia, Chairman of the Boards of Governors of the African Development Bank Group, Honorable Governors of the African Development Bank Group, Dr. Akinwumi Ayodeji Adesina, President of the African Development Bank Group, Executive Directors of the African Development Bank Group, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. It is a great honor and a privilege indeed to welcome you all at the 51st annual meeting of the African Development Bank and to the 42nd annual meeting of the African Development Bank. On this very solemn occasion, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to your presence to this August gatherings presided over by the new African Development Bank President. We are pleased to be in Zambia, a place well known in Africa, especially in the Southern African sub-region, for our contribution towards the struggle for independence. We are also grateful for the warm welcome accorded to us since our arrival in this beautiful city of Lusaka. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is important to note that this is not the first time that Zambia hosts the annual meetings of the African Development Bank Group. Zambia hosted these meetings in 1973 and 1982. In recognition of this great contribution, I would like to say Zikomo Kwambere. Zikomo Kwambere. This ceremony will run as follows. We'll start with a welcome statement by Honorable Mr. Alexander Bwalya Chikwanda, our Chairman of the Boards of Governors of the African Development Bank Group. He will have a statement by Dr. Akinwumi Ayodeji Adesina, President of the African Development Bank Group. This will be followed by an address by His Excellency, Mr. Idris Deby Itno, President of the Republic of Chad and Chairperson of the African Union. We will end with an opening address by His Excellency Mr. Edgar Chagwa Lungu, President of the Republic of Zambia. This will mark the end of the opening ceremony. But before that, we should say thank you once again to Zambia and to the people of Zambia for helping us build what we think is going to be a very nice village for the African Bank is here in Lusaka. So, natutela mwebantu muba Zambia. So, let me now invite the Chairman of the Boards of Governors of the African Development Bank Group to deliver his statement.
Monsieur Secretary General.
Thank you very much, Secretary General.
Your Excellency, the President of the Republic of Zambia, Your Excellency, the Chairperson of the African Union, Your Excellency, the Chairperson of SADC, Your Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, Excellencies, former heads of state and government, Your Honor, the Vice President of the Republic of Zambia, Excellencies, Vice Presidents and Prime Ministers, Honorable Governors and Ministers, the President of the African Development Bank, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, former Presidents of the African Development Bank, distinguished delegates and invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Zambia, Mr. Edgar Chagwalungu, the government and the people of Zambia, I would like to extend to you a very warm welcome to Zambia and to the annual general meetings of the African Development Bank. We are privileged as a country to chair and host these meetings, having last done so 43 years ago in 1973. I would like at this stage to thank Dr. Adesina for the leadership and collaboration in ensuring that these meetings are a success. I'm aware, Dr. Adesina, that this is your first annual meeting that you are conducting in your new role as President of the bank. What we've seen, your passion and vision for achievement and delivery will surely bring a new ray of reform in the bank and consequently the continent through better targeting. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this year's meetings of the African Development Bank are being held under difficult times for most of the member states' economies. Since the last meeting, our economies have been subjected to sharp declines in commodity prices, particularly oil and metals, which has inevitably entailed declining revenues. Further, weather variation in the form of drought and floods has ravaged the African region, including electricity generation slumps and food deficits that are afflicting the poorest of our citizens. As a result, economies are under severe strain as they have to sustain wider fiscal and external sector deficits to do with these developments. Further, while economic growth has weakened, with the International Monetary Fund estimating growth for the region at 3.5% for 2015, the lowest level in some 15 years. Further, development assistance from traditional donors has slumped on account of difficulties in donor countries' economies, while access to capital flows in the global economy has tightened due to investor risk aversion, thus making it increasingly difficult for most of our countries to tackle the current challenges. Excellencies, these meetings are therefore a very well-timed event for the continent as they provide us with the opportunity to deal with these externally induced challenges and to refocus our economies in a way that will stimulate broader, resilient and more sustainable growth going forward. The raised profile of our bank over the past many years has provided us with viable institutions within the African continent to deal with these challenges in an African way and using African experiences. I am confident that with improved capacities in economic management amongst our people, the continent will rise above the challenges by turning these challenges into opportunity. With the focus of the bank on the high fives, the continent now has an opportunity to have effective delivery vehicles for most structural reforms that have been pending on the continent. The focus in the areas of economic integration of the African continent, industrialization, aimed at moving away from primary commodity exports dependence, Powering Africa that addresses connectivity to support future economic growth and increased access by the majority of Africans, the agenda on Feeding Africa that seeks to transform the continent into a food hub, and efforts to improve the quality of lives of our people are well targeted in the priority areas where Africa has made adequate traction in the past few decades. Excellencies, with the vision being provided by the bank, we are assured that the continent will overcome its challenges and make Africa a credible destination of choice for capital and investment. As the bank's annual meeting such a large annual event bringing together several thousands of delegates and participants from all over the world and featuring some 40 official events in addition to the annual meeting of the Board of Governors, I urge all delegates to take advantage of this gathering to strike strategic partnerships with institutions, organizations, and individuals in the development and business arena to ensure that Africa positions itself strategically and gets the most out of these meetings. As a continent at a relatively low ebb of development, our hopes and expectations of the African Development Bank as an institution of development are very high, as our countries have palpably glaring resource gaps. It is a tall order for the bank to satisfy the continent's insatiable needs for enhanced capital formation. However, the bank already plays a pivotal role by financing a wide spectrum of projects which provide the base for sustainable economic takeoff. The bank's capital stock needs to be boosted, which places responsibility in all member countries, even with afraid economies, to meet that eventuality. The bank has to be innovative and embrace meaningful reforms to ensure effective and expeditious implementation of the projects. We should together explore how the resources of the bank can be channeled to the private sector so that thousands of small and medium enterprises, who are the surest way of growing our economies at affordable costs, can access capital. Distinguished guests, banks by their nature are not radical institutions, but given the dynamics of the world development process, ritualism, orthodox, and business as usual can never be a recipe for taking us forward. I am persuaded beyond all shade of doubt that our bank will rise to the challenges of accelerated growth of the continent with huge backlogs of development areas by requisite restructuring. It's now my pleasant duty to wish everyone fruitful deliberation and a good stay in the nation's capital and indeed beyond the confines of Lusaka, to see the real Zambia away from the trappings of modernity and contemporaneity which our capitals on the continent display, invariably adrift from the reality of exceedingly squeezed populations. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Merci bien. Danke schön. Mille gracia. Tak. Sheshe. Arigato. Spasiba. Asante. Murakoze. Ziko mkwambi. God bless.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much.
Maintenant, je voudrais inviter
I would now like to
notre président
invite
à nous,
our
le docteur
President,
Adesina,
Dr. Adesina, to take the floor and deliver his statement on the main priorities of the bank for the following years, the upcoming years.
Your Excellency Edgar Lungu, President of the Republic of Zambia, Your Excellency Idris Deby Itno, President of the Republic of Chad and Chairperson of the African Union, Your Excellency President Paul Kagame, President of the Republic of Rwanda, Your Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta, he's on his way, President of the Republic of Kenya, Your Excellency Mrs. Inonge Wina, Vice President of the Republic of Zambia, Your Excellency Professor Yemi Oshibajo, Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Your Excellency Mr. Carlos Dorosabio, Prime Minister of Mozambique, Your Excellency Kassim Majaliwa, Prime Minister of Tanzania, Mrs. Saha Nasi, Minister of International Cooperation, and who is representing President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, the President of Arab Republic of Egypt, Your Excellency Madam Mary Therese Winifred Robinson, former President of Ireland, Your Excellency Horst Holler, former President of Germany, Your Excellency John Kufuor is probably one of the tallest folks in this room, former President of Ghana, Your Excellency Kofi Annan, former UN Secretary General, Dr. Mutai Muraping, Commissioner of Economic Affairs, representing the Chairperson of the African Union Commission, my brother Carlos Lopez, Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, Honorable Ministers of the Federal Republic of the Republic of Zambia, Your Excellencies, Heads of Missions of the Diplomatic Corps in Zambia, Honorable Alexander Chikwanda, Minister of Finance, Republic of Zambia, and the Chairperson of the Board of Governors of the African Development Bank Group, Honorable Governors of the African Development Bank Group, Executive Directors of the African Development Bank Group, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Mwakwa Mbwaji. I would like to welcome you to this annual meeting of the African Development Bank Group. You are shareholders, friends of Africa, are the ones that make this meeting an exciting one. I wish to express my deepest personal gratitude to you, Mr. President, President of Zambia, President Edgar Lungu, and the government and the people of Zambia for their hard work and generosity in hosting us in this beautiful country. Thank you very much, sir. I welcome all the presidents, the vice presidents, the prime ministers, and all former presidents here today. We are deeply honored by your presence. Your presence sends a very strong signal that African leaders back the African Development Bank. Our board of governors, our board of directors, and their advisors, bank staff, colleagues, private sector, civil society, youth, and the media are all here in large numbers. The old and the new, and some of the new families of the African Development Bank are also here. Let me in particular welcome former presidents of the African Development Bank Group, Babaka Ndiaye, and also Kwame Fordho is here with his wife. Please thank you and welcome to the annual meetings. I also would like to welcome Dr. Franny Lutier. Franny, are you here somewhere in this hall? Yeah, please. Dr. Lutier is our new Senior Vice President, who becomes the first woman to ever hold this position in the history of the bank. I also welcome Dr. Alberi Kaku, our new Vice President for Human Resources and Corporate Affairs, and David Segawa, our new Director of Human Resources. Welcome to the annual meetings and welcome to the land of Zambia. The Mulungushi, where we are meeting today, was built in 1970 for hosting the Lon-Aligned movement to support liberation everywhere, and President Kufuor was here when that was done in 1970. This is a land of wonders, the land of the great Victoria Falls, which you call Masiao Choya. The smoke that thunders the land of refuge where the freedom fighters that fought against apartheid in South Africa and Namibia took refuge. A resilient nation, which despite severe attacks and bombings by the apartheid regime, stood firm and tall, ably led by the father of the nation, President Kenneth Kaunda, in support of freedom. That is Zambia. Zambia is also special for the bank. The late Mr. Willa Mungoma, the former president of the African Development Bank, came from Zambia. He served Zambia well, and he served Africa well, and I recall he also liked bow ties just like myself. From this annual meeting in Zambia will go out thunders of jubilation for a new Africa whose time has come. Zambia is always on the positive side of history. By hosting this annual meeting in Zambia, I am sure that at the end, we will also be on the right side of history. Just like Zambia was on the front line in the liberation of Africa, so shall we from this annual meeting put the accelerated development of Africa on the front line. And nothing is more important than energy and climate change, the theme of this annual meeting. Ces assemblées annuelles revêtent pour moi une importance particulière.
This annual meetings are very special. My first as president. For just 1 year ago, on May 28, 2015, in Abidjan, you, our Board of Governors, elected me as the 8th president of the bank. I assumed duty 8 months ago, on the 1st of September 2015. It was such a huge honor for me. As I noted during my inauguration, I took this position with a full sense of responsibility. For me, this is not just a job, it is a mission. It is a mission for a greater Africa. It is a mission that awakens me every day, a mission based on the vision of the founding fathers of this bank. I'd also like to note that amongst us today we have Makabachu, former president of the African Development Bank. Welcome, sir. I ran for election for the position of President of the African Development Bank on a platform to accelerate the developmental impacts in Africa. You elected me on the basis of the 5 priorities that I clearly laid out in my vision statement. Let me now update you on where we are on the path to achieving that vision, in order to make sure that this vision is implemented.
With what I promised, to accelerate the impacts of the bank's 10-year strategy, we have sharply focused the bank's work around top 5 priorities. We call them the high fives. Light up and power Africa. Feed Africa. Industrialize Africa. Integrate Africa, and improve the quality of life for the people of Africa. We rapidly concluded the development of the strategies of all the high fives in less than 6 months. With the approval of our board of directors, we will be launching 2 of them at this annual meeting: the New Deal on Energy to light up and power Africa, and our Jobs for Africa's Youth strategy to improve the quality of life, especially for the youth all across Africa. We have been delighted at the bank with the overwhelming support for the high fives all across Africa by the African Union, the regional economic communities, the private sector, and the civil society. The bank has raised its level of aspiration for Africa. Africa must think big, act big, and deliver big. We must never have low aspirations for Africa. We decided to work on Light Up and Power Africa because Africa is the only region of the world where the lack of electricity has unfortunately become the norm. Over 645 million people lack access to electricity. Over 700 million people do not have access to clean energy for cooking. Children learn in the dark. Businesses operate in the dark. Surgeries are done in the dark. The greatest hindrance to Africa's growth and development is lack of electricity. It is unacceptable that 138 years after Thomas Edison developed the light bulb, hundreds of millions of African people cannot have access to electricity to simply light up the bulb in Africa. The bank has launched the transformative partnership on Energy for Africa to work with our partners to address this challenge. Together with our partners, including the African Union, the Africa Progress Panel, NEPAD, President Obama's Power Africa Initiative, the World Bank, the Sustainable Energy for All, Africa Energy Leaders Group, the European Union, the UK government's initiative, China, France, Germany, Scandinavian countries, Japan, Korea, India, and private sector and others, we are embarking on a very bold effort to light up and power Africa within 10 years. This is what we call co-development at the bank, a new way of working with others in a transformative way to solve major challenges in Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, Africa is simply tired of being in the dark. Our goal is clear: universal access to energy for Africa within 10 years. Expand grid power by 160 gigawatts. Connect 130 million persons to the grid power. Connect 75 million people to the off-grid systems. And provide access to 140 million households to clean cooking energy. The focus of this annual meeting on energy and climate change is for good reason. Just last month, I traveled to a number of countries and I witnessed firsthand the effects of El Nino on these populations. 13 of the 14 countries affected by the severe droughts are located in East and Southern Africa. Africa, which contributes less than 3% of global greenhouse emissions, now suffers disproportionately from the negative impacts of climate change. Kenya and Rwanda have devastating floods. In Malawi, over 8.4 million people face food insecurity. In Ethiopia, more than 15 million people are at the risk of food insecurity. Vast areas of South Africa, including here in Zambia, Zimbabwe, Lesotho, and Botswana, face similar challenges. The African Development Bank immediately announced financing of $549 million to support countries to deal with the drought and reduce vulnerability. Ladies and gentlemen, climate change is real, and Africa is at the receiving end. There must be climate justice for Africa. Africa, which has been shortchanged by climate change, must not be shortchanged by climate finance. This is the time for action on climate finance for Africa. That is why I call on the Green Climate Fund and the Global Environment Facility to pay for the insurance premium of African countries to the Africa Risk Capacity Agency. This will allow them to cope with the extreme climate events that lead to huge fiscal stress. Such insurance has significant impacts. It allowed Senegal to receive $17 million to pay to mitigate the impacts of drought. The African Development Bank will lead the way on green growth and will triple its climate finance to $5 billion per year by 2020. We have begun to reorganize ourselves to deliver on our high five priorities. Our new business model for the bank was approved by our board of directors just a month ago. We will be fit for purpose. The bank has now established a new vice presidency complex on power, energy, and green growth. This makes the African Development Bank the first multilateral development bank globally to fully dedicate a vice presidency complex entirely to energy to light up and power Africa. Our focus will be on energy systems, renewable energy, energy policy, statistics and regulations, and energy partnerships. A new vice presidency for agriculture, human and social development will drive our Feed Africa agenda with major focus on transforming agriculture into a business for our farmers all across African countries. Our goal is clear: achieve food self-sufficiency in Africa in 10 years, eliminate malnutrition and hunger, and move Africa to the top of the agricultural value chains and accelerate access to water and sanitation. I am delighted to inform you that just yesterday at this annual meeting, we launched the African Leaders for Nutrition to bring the highest level of attention to ending malnutrition and stunting in Africa. We did this together with the Global Panel on Agriculture, Food Systems for Nutrition under the chairmanship of former President John Kufuor, the African Union and NEPAD, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Kofi Annan Foundation, the Big Win Philanthropy, Dangote Foundation, and the World Food Programme. I am delighted, personally, with the engagement and partnership of Bill Gates as he joined us yesterday via video link with a passionate call for action to end malnutrition on this continent. A new vice presidency on private sector, infrastructure and industrialization will drive private sector operations to deepen financial markets, private sector growth, scale up infrastructure investments, and sharply focus on the industrialization of Africa. The formula for the wealth of nations is clear. Rich nations add value to exports. Poor nations export raw materials. For example, Africa accounts for 75% of the global production of cocoa, but reaps only 2% of the $100 billion annual market for chocolates. This model can no longer create the desired wealth for Africa. Africa must no longer be stuck at the bottom of the value chains. Africa must now rapidly diversify its export mix and add value to all its raw materials by developing efficient and competitive value chains. This is especially crucial as Africa only accounts for 1.9% of the global value added in manufacturing, and that has not changed for decades. It is time to industrialize Africa. In order to make the bank more efficient and deliver on the high fives, we have decided to move the bank closer to its clients. As part of our new development and business delivery model, the bank will now establish 5 regional integration and business delivery offices, one each for West, East, Central, Northern, and Southern Africa. They will each be led by newly created positions of Director Generals. The Director Generals will have the full responsibility of spearheading the bank's operations in each of these respective regions. Senior bank staff from the sectors will be posted to each of the regions, and they will be fully part of the delivery team in each of these regions. The bank will strengthen its relationships with each of our member countries, paying particular attention to the need of fragile states. These regional development and business development hubs will significantly strengthen our engagement with the regional economic communities to drive major regional integration projects. These landmark institutional reforms will make us faster, more efficient, and more effective in delivering greater developmental impacts all across Africa. We will drive a new performance contract system at the bank and a culture of accountability for results all across our bank. Some have said that we are too passionate or perhaps a bit too ambitious. Well, there is no other option for Africa. Africa has already waited for too long. We must accelerate Africa's development. With over 500 million people living in poverty, Africa cannot have low aspirations. With over 5,000 Africans dead in the Mediterranean fleeing to Europe, Africa cannot afford to have low ambitions. With climate change shrinking the size of Lake Chad Basin, decimating the livelihoods and undermining regional security for Nigeria, Chad, Cameroon, and Niger, Africa cannot afford to have low ambitions. With Africa spending $13 billion per year to import food, and that will rise to $110 billion in 2020, Africa cannot have low ambitions. With the need to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and to meet its commitments to climate change under COP21, Africa cannot have low ambitions. With the need to rapidly diversify their economies and mobilize domestic resources, African countries need greater support more than ever. The bank of choice they look to is the African Development Bank, your bank. We are matching our words with actions. Our lending reached its highest ever by the end of December 2015 with $9 billion. In 2015, the bank provided $1.3 billion to energy projects. The bank has continued to lead the way and finance renewable energy projects, including the 300 megawatts Lake Turkana Wind Power Station, the largest wind power plant in Africa. We supported the North Complex, the world's largest concentrated power plant in Morocco, with capacity to produce power for over 1 million people by 2018. The bank financed power interconnections to link Ethiopia, Kenya, Zambia, expanding regional power pools. In December 2015, we provided $135 million to finance Rusizi 3, which is a 147 megawatts power plant to provide electricity to Rwanda, Burundi, and Republic of Congo. We will do more. To deliver on the New Deal on Energy for Africa, the African Development Bank will invest $12 billion in the energy sector over the next 5 years. We expect to leverage $45 to $50 billion into the sector. What else can demonstrate the level of readiness for the high fights in Africa? Just take a look around you. We have the chairman of the African Union, President Idris Deby, representing all the African heads of state. We have several African presidents and heads of governments, former presidents, a record in the history of our annual meetings. We have Kofi Annan here, former presidents of Ireland, former president of Germany, the African Progress Panel, and the elders. Their presence sends a very strong signal. We support the level of aspiration for Africa. This is the time. Ladies and gentlemen, yet today, this event is being held against the news of a weak global economy and the sharp decline in global commodity prices, including oil, minerals, and metals. The weak economic recovery in Europe has compounded the effects of the slowdown in China, both large markets for the exports from Africa. Many African countries that depend on oil exports especially face declines in foreign reserves. With rising current account deficits, domestic fiscal imbalances, depreciation of currencies, and rising inflation. Times are hard, no doubt. But despite the end of the commodity super cycle and the headwinds, Africa is not falling apart. The Africa Rising story remains strong. While the global economy is projected to grow at 3%, this year Africa is projected to grow at about 4.4% in 2016 and an increase of 5% by 2017. Ladies and gentlemen, African economies are not unraveling, they remain resilient. But to continue to be resilient, Africa must not get into a debt crisis. Increasingly, many African countries taking advantage of low global interest rates have rushed to the global markets by issuing bonds. Between 2006 and 2014, Africa issued $26 billion in terms of Euro bonds. But today, with rising interest rates, African countries now face a challenge of high cost of financing the foreign currency denominated debt. An indebted Africa cannot be a rising Africa. There is need for urgent measures to ensure macroeconomic stabilization, fiscal consolidation, broadening of the tax base, and deepening of the domestic capital markets. African countries should look inward and mobilize domestic resources for development. They should find better ways to securitize remittances, which reached $62 billion in 2014, an amount that exceeds total official development assistance. They should leverage sovereign wealth funds, which stand at $162 billion, or domestic tax revenues at $500 billion, but also private equity funds, which stands at over $27 billion, pension funds that stand at $334 billion. We must also end the illicit capital flows that deny Africa over $60 billion a year. Money belonging to citizens in Africa should not be found in personal accounts. These are all significant financing sources that should be effectively channeled for development. And by doing so, we will help to drive Africa's readiness for industrial development. Just 2 weeks ago, we were in Kigali at the World Economic Forum, hosted by President Paul Kagame, discussing the fourth industrial revolution. Africa must improve its readiness index for the digital revolution. We must rapidly build skills, scientific capacity, especially in sciences, technology, mathematics, and engineering. Ladies and gentlemen, Africa has missed out on the earlier industrial revolutions. We cannot miss the fourth industrial revolution. To avoid this, Africa needs energy to power its industries. Like blood in the body, so is power to industrial growth and development. Through the bank's Job for Africa's Youth initiative, we will support digital literacy, logical thinking, and computational skills in secondary and primary schools. We will also support coding academies that will drive advanced computational skills for employment, focusing on youths in universities and polytechnics. Through our Boost Africa initiative with our partners, the European Union, private equity funds will be established to boost businesses of young people. We plan to leverage $5 billion to support businesses of young African entrepreneurs. Our goal, create 25 million jobs for the youth for over a 10-year period in agriculture, ICT, and other sectors. The future of Africa's youth does not lie at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea. It lies in a more prosperous and inclusive Africa, one that promotes creativity and innovation, that expands economic opportunities for the youth. It lies in an Africa that creates jobs for its own people. We must be audacious, for Africa must develop and develop with pride. A pride that is best reflected by Kevin Doe from Sierra Leone. At the age of 12, he developed from scratch his own batteries from acid, soda, and metal mixed in cup at home. His batteries are now powering his village in Sierra Leone. He moved on to develop a generator for his village using metal scraps. His generator now provides services to his community to charge their mobile phones. And he powers his own radio FM station. He became an employer, providing part-time jobs for youths to become broadcasters in his own FM station. He was invited to MIT Innovations Lab and lectured students at Harvard University and MIT to show off his ingenuity. He was the youngest person ever to be invited to be a visiting practitioner at MIT, following in the footsteps of his younger mentor, another young Sierra Leonean, David Senge, a PhD student who is spearheading cutting-edge bioengineering innovations for prosthetics at MIT. Just listen to his story for a minute or two and see how one African youth turns trash into treasure. Video clip, please.
We have not too much electricity, so I made my own battery. My name is Kelvin Doe and I am an inventor. In Sierra Leone, I like to come once in a week and the rest of the month dark. So I made my own battery to power lights in people's houses. People normally call me DJ Focus in my community because I believe if you focus, you can do invention perfectly. When I was 11, I started picking up scrap electronic items from trash areas. I realized with scrap, I could still make things work, like my battery, an FM radio station. Soundtrack done by Bobby, upon Sierra Leonean artist. Your satisfaction is absolutely guaranteed.
Great opportunities have become available to Kelvin. He's doing things that we never imagined he will be doing.
I was raised up single-handedly by my mother. Her resilience and self-belief made it possible for me to be alive today. Somebody mentioned to me that my video was even more popular than that of President Obama's victory speech.
That is my aim, to promote innovation in Sierra Leone among young people.
Kevin is from a fragile state, but Kevin has an agile mind. Fragility cannot thwart creativity. Kevin shows us the power of Africa's youth to be creative. He did not run away on a rickety boat to Europe, but stayed back in his hometown, home in Sierra Leone to continue his inventions. Kevin is right here in this room today. Kevin, where are you? Where is Kevin? Come right up here. Kevin, come up here. Great folks like you shall have the honor of greeting our presidents. Please go ahead. Just like Kevin, we at the bank have launched an innovation pitch where bank staff are encouraged to come up with great ideas to change Africa. I am delighted that at the last count, 60% of our staff have submitted ideas of how to do more, do better, and do well. This is the new culture of innovation that we are now driving at the bank. Through the Jobs for Africa's Youth initiative that will be launched at this meeting, the African Development Bank will help to promote creativity and businesses of more young people across all sectors, just like Kevin. We will also continue to do more to specially empower women. At this annual meeting, we will be launching the Affirmative Finance Action for Women, a fund dedicated to leverage $3 billion exclusively to support women entrepreneurs all across Africa. Women are the strength of Africa. When women win, Africa wins. The African Development Bank can do all of this because of our AAA rating by international rating agencies, and I owe a lot to the previous presidents of the bank on whose shoulder I stand today for the marvelous job that you have done to give us that triple rating. Thank you. By December 2015, and this is because you, our shareholders, also strongly support the bank and our institutional reforms, and because of the prudent management of the bank. By December 2015, the bank's AAA rating was maintained by all rating agencies. This will further allow us to source financing from the capital markets at favorable rates. We pass on these rates to our regional member countries. But even as we do so, we recognize the special needs of low-income countries, especially the fragile states. And to help us do more, especially for low-income countries, the bank is currently in the process of the 14th replenishment of the African Development Fund. Let me use this opportunity to thank all of our donors for the African Development Fund. The challenges facing low-income countries are still significant, yet the potentials they have to unlock are immense. I ask for your generous increase in the replenishment. I know times are hard, but your continued support to help unlock Africa's potential will bring great hope for millions of people. The African Development Bank is here to support Africa's great aspirations. Together, we can deliver greater developmental impacts for Africa. I would like to especially appreciate the Board of Governors, the Board of Directors of the bank, their advisors, and the bank staff who have worked incredibly hard to get us here. I am proud of the staff of the African Development Bank. The excellent organization of this annual meeting by all the top officials of the Zambian Organizing Committee, ably led by Honorable Alexander Chikwanda, Minister of Finance and Chairman of the Board of Governors, was great work. Thank you all for being on the front line. I would also like to thank Mr. Kofi Annan, former UN Secretary General, and former President Horst Kohler of Germany, and all as co-chairs, and all the eminent members of the special high-level panel that have committed to support the bank as it accelerates the delivery of its 10-year strategy through the high fives. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, now let us deliver together on the high fives all across Africa. Let us be on the right side of history. Please turn to the person next to you and give them a high five just like this. Give Africa a high five. I wish you all a very enjoyable and fruitful annual meeting. Thank you very much, and God bless.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't know if we are going to light up Africa immediately, but I am convinced that we are going to light up the African Development Bank. Thank you very much. Right now, I will give the floor to the Chairman of Presidents, His Excellency President Idris Deby Itno. You have the floor, sir.
Excellences, Monsieur le Président de la République de Zambie,
Your Excellency, the President of the Republic of Zambia, Your Excellencies, Heads of State, Heads of Delegations, Your Excellencies, Prime Ministers, the Chairman of the Board of Governors of the African Development Bank Group, the President of the African Development Bank Group, Your Excellencies, former Presidents, Honorable Governors of the African Development Bank Group, members of the Board of Directors of the African Development Bank Group, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is with genuine delight that I speak speak on the occasion of the solemn opening ceremony of the annual meetings of the boards of governors of the African Development Bank Group. And let me first start, before anything else, to extend my deep gratitude to my brother Edgar Lungu, President of the Republic of Zambia, for the warm and fraternal welcome and hospitality that I and my delegation have enjoyed ever since we arrived in the beautiful city of Lusaka. Ladies and gentlemen, Africa in recent years has been beset by serious problems which actually undermine its very stability and existence. And here I am referring to the issues related to food security, global warming, and especially the prevailing insecurity in our regions caused by international terrorism. Our continent is also replete with a myriad of solutions which it can implement, provided only that it believes in itself and resolutely embarks on the actions required for us to get out of this limbo. When I assumed office as chair of the African Union in Addis Ababa in January 2016, I told my African peers that we have been talking and that it was high time we stopped talking and started doing the work.
Monsieur le Président du groupe de la Banque africaine de développement,
the President of the African Development Bank Group, it was with keen interest that I listened to the presentation of your program and your ambitions which you have for the African Development Bank and for the continent. And I would like to congratulate you, especially on the positive reforms which you are currently implementing, and urge you to indeed effectively and efficiently support Africa's rapid progress towards emergence. Being myself greatly concerned by the thorny issue of youth unemployment, it is with satisfaction that I note the program which you have launched for youth employment, as well as the implementation of a specific program for the women of Africa. Mr. President, the management of the African Development Bank has recently come up with a new vision based on 5 main priorities or high fives, namely light up on our Africa, feed Africa, industrialize Africa, integrate Africa, and improve on the quality of life for Africans. We know we can count on the President of the African Development Bank, the Board of Directors, and all the staff members of that institution to ensure that all those commitments are translated into concrete results for the benefit of the people of the continent. Please be aware that the continent has heard you and the continent is monitoring your activity on the program which you have outlined for your term of office. Also, know that we, heads of state, will always be by your side, not only to follow you, but also to enable you to better accomplish your mission. The theme of our current annual meetings, namely energy and climate change, indeed focuses on one of those high fives, namely light up and power Africa.
La dégradation du climat, l'Afrique n'est pas du tout comptable.
Africa is not actually accountable for the climate setbacks, but is really bedeviled by all the adverse consequences of climate change.
60 ans après les indépendances,
60 years after independence, in some regions and countries of Africa, you have less than 3% of the population who have access to energy.
La situation énergétique pérennisante de l'Afrique,
Africa's gloomy energy situation is universally recognized, and there is no doubt today that a prerequisite for the development of our continent is availability of easily accessible and affordable energy for all. During the COP21 summit, we were also able to hold extensive discussions on climate change and its impact on the continent, and we agreed on the various actions to be implemented. The miracle of light can be achieved in Africa only if we decide to invest massively in order to ensure that our people get access to energy. And in this respect, I would like to make this call to our external partners to spontaneously, unconditionally and unreservedly support us in order for us to harness our significant renewable energy potential. Without energy, we cannot achieve any industrial transformation or the development of the private and services sector, and our continent will not be able to harness its resources and wealth so that it can become a bona fide international partner in such a way as to contribute to international trade. With the COP21, the continent resolutely committed to take actions with the backing of the international community. And allow me to revisit two significant measures. First and foremost, I would like to make this appeal to African countries to massively join the Africa Risk Capacity Agency so that our people can be better protected from the climate hazards and setbacks. The second point I would like to raise is in terms of the climate fund management. Our partners should do even more to ensure that resources are mobilized, as well as to ensure that those resources, once mobilized, are used efficiently. It is necessary for us to set up a unique or single fund for the continent with respect to the climate funds, and this should be hosted by the African Development Bank. It is up to heads of state of the continent to design the mechanisms for the management of those climate funds within the continent, which fund will be hosted by the African Development Bank. It is our hope that at the next annual meetings in 2017, each and every one of our countries will be able to testify to the support from the AfDB with respect to lightening up their respective countries and the continent at large. It would be remiss of me, in my capacity as current chair of the African Union, not to urge our states to lend their strong support to the African Development Bank Group as it embarks on this noble journey towards ensuring a better and emerging Africa. The presence today of several heads of state and their representatives is an eloquent testimony of this support. The challenges as such that we have to pool our resources and demonstrate genuine political commitment. A holistic, common and concerted action would be even more relevant and efficient. Africa's integration remains an indispensable ideal. on which our very survival depends. Allow me to recall, with the benefit of our governors, a background which they are already familiar with and which they should incorporate in their respective brainstorming and discussions. And this has to do with the global economic downturn, the plummeting commodity prices, and the terrorist threats. Let me once again remind all and sundry that we are expecting support for sustainable solutions to the terrorism threat, namely by effectively implementing development programs towards eradicating poverty in the Lake Chad Basin and its Sahel, which are being borne by the Lake Chad Basin Commission and the G5 Sahel. Before concluding my remarks, I would like to thank Africa's partners for their myriad contributions so that together we can usher in a much fairer and stable world. On behalf of the continent of Africa, allow me to make this appeal to our partners to significantly replenish the 14th Africa Development Fund. Thank you for your kind attention.
Merci le président Déby Itno. Je voudrais maintenant donner la parole à
thank President Déby, and I would like now to give the floor to our host, His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Zambia. Your Excellency, you do have the floor.
Your Excellency, the Chairperson of the African Union, my dear brother, President Déby, Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, Excellencies, former Heads of State and Government, the Chairman of the Board of Governors of the African Development Bank, Honorable Governors and Ministers present, the President of the African Development Bank, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, Excellencies, Ambassadors and High Commissioners accredited to the Republic of Zambia, distinguished delegates, invited guests, members of the press, ladies and gentlemen. It is my singular honor and privilege to warmly welcome you to Lusaka. We are privileged to have you in Zambia at this historic gathering, and on behalf of the government and the people of the Republic of Zambia, and even on my own behalf, I am deeply honored to address you today on the occasion of the official opening of the 2016 African Development Bank Group annual meetings. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, these annual meetings have an appropriate focus on a very current challenge, which is that of energy and climate change, an issue that threatens to erode the continent's economic gains of the past decade, if not well addressed. Our expectations are that these meetings will generate resolutions
which will help Africa shape its post-2016 development agenda and address the numerous ramifications of energy deficits and climate change confronting the African continent. I am confident that our expectations will be met given an array of expertise and experience from Your Excellencies, heads of state and government, and indeed the high-profile finance and development experts participating in the meetings. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, your presence here today at this high-level gathering is a strong demonstration of the collective resolve and deep commitment you have to ensure that energy deficits and climate change do not become a hindrance to our poverty reduction efforts and attainment of economic prosperity for our people on the continent. Our success at this meeting will surely restore our continent as a central economic player in the global economy and an investment destination of choice for the future. This is the reason why we in Zambia find it a compelling duty to host this event. Energy shortages and climate variability and change have become a major threat to sustainable development in Africa. Growth on the continent has already been reduced. The International Monetary Fund, IMF World Economic Outlook, has estimated growth at 3%, a level which is well below the 5 to 7% range experienced over the last 10 years. Whilst the slump in commodity prices has played a role in this slowdown, energy shortages and climate change-related issues have played even a bigger role in dampening growth prospects, hence putting the poorest of our continent in a precarious position as far as food security is concerned. It is now clear, therefore, that these two issues have increasingly crystallized into a binding constraint to the continent's growth. Zambia, unfortunately, has not been spared of the impacts of energy shortages and climate variabilities. Our economic prospects have been negatively impacted. Below normal rainfall experienced in 2015, which continued in 2016, causing electricity generation to reduce by 3.3% last year, while in 2016, generation is projected to contract by about 38.9%. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, similarly, agricultural production fell by 8.1% in 2015, although fortunately replanting by our farmers this year is projected to have caused a modest surplus. These developments have had ramifications on other sectors such as mining and manufacturing, resulting in economic growth in 2015 being marked down to 3.2% from the projected 7% growth in 2016. We expect the growth to be lower than the 7% which we had projected by 3.5%. I am aware that these challenges are characteristic in most of sub-Saharan Africa and also in the Southern African region, where drought linked to the ongoing El Nino weather pattern has continued to put a great majority of the population under the threat of starvation. And according to the IMF Africa Economic Outlook, large parts of Southern and Eastern Africa are facing a severe drought, potentially threatening food security for about 40 to 50 million people. In the Southern African region, food crisis is looming as most countries are likely to experience below required levels of food production. Ethiopia, Lesotho, Malawi, and Zimbabwe have appealed for humanitarian assistance. The region's agricultural output has been severely hampered, while hydroelectric power generation has been adversely affected with severe power rationing that has in turn reduced industrial activity across sectors. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, food inflation is accelerating in most of our countries, while pressures on budgets have intensified due to the need to sustain high expenditures on activities such as food and electricity imports. Further, higher import bills and lower foreign exchange receipts as a result of commodity price slump on the national markets has resulted in weaker external positions, deteriorating the macroeconomic situation as currencies have depreciated with attendant risks of stoking inflationary spirals. The effects of these developments are expected to take long to moderate, with power generation in countries such as Zambia and Zimbabwe expected to return to normal only in about 3 years' time. Depending on normalization, of course, in rainfall patterns, but are we sure about this? We should, however, comprehend that a complete reversal may be challenging and may require extraordinary measures, most of which we expect to come from our meeting taking place in the next few days amongst you, ladies and gentlemen. In Zambia, for example, climate trends based on records from 1960 to 2003 indicate that mean annual temperature has increased by 1.3 degrees Celsius since 1960, an average rate of 0.34 degrees Celsius per decade. On the other hand, the mean rainfall over Zambia has decreased by an average rate of 1.9 millimeter per month, which translates to 2.3% per decade since 1960. The future trends in the country are towards higher average temperatures, possible decreases in total rainfall, and an indication of occasional bouts of rainfall. Further, food security in the region is still expected to remain precarious, even if it normalizes due to variability in crop reserves in most of the countries. And with the growing industrialization, as it continues, any challenges are expected to become evident. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, what is consoling is that we have a good plan from our bank on how to respond to this crisis. In this regard, let me take this opportunity to extend my congratulations to the President, Dr. Adesina, and the team at the African Development Bank on the launch of a new deal on energy, which is built on the 5 interrelated and mutually reinforcing principles commonly known as the high fives, which is 1, raising aspiration to solve Africa's energy challenges; 2, establishing a transformative partnership on energy for Africa; 3, mobilizing domestic and international capital for innovative financing in Africa's energy sector; 4, supporting African governments in strengthening energy policy, regulating and sector governance; and 5, increasing the African Development Bank's investment in energy and climate financing. It is clear that these objectives will enable us to take stock of the current state of Africa's energy and critically examine the energy policies being pursued by our countries. I therefore wish to make an earnest appeal to all participants to use their vast knowledge and experience to provide greater insights of these important issues in order to facilitate effective implementation of our development agenda. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, Africa is without doubt the perfect place and platform for a discussion on energy and climate matters. Nowhere are the threads connecting energy, climate, and development more evident than in Africa today. Affordable and reliable electricity underpins every aspect of social and economic life. 2 in every 3 Africans, totaling about 640 million people, have no access to electricity at all. Needless to say, Africa has massive resources for both conventional and renewable energy, and yet it is known for darkness in homes and no power for our industries. Without universal access to energy services of adequate quality and quantity, countries cannot sustain dynamic growth, build more inclusive societies, and accelerate progress towards eradicating poverty. Our chairman has just alluded to how poverty has been the genesis for terrorism on the African continent. Unless we eradicate poverty, Africa will not manage to overcome the radicalization of the poverty-stricken youths on the continent. When health systems are unable to provide preventive and curative services, people who are already vulnerable face heightened risks. Energy deficits act as a brake on economic growth, job creation, and indeed poverty reduction. and thus reinforce inequalities linked to wealth, gender, and the rural-urban divide. It is therefore paramount that energy matters are comprehensively addressed. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, on climate change, no singular region has made a smaller contribution to climate change than Africa. Yet Africa continues to pay the highest price for failure to avert a global climate and catastrophe. My message to this meeting is that Africa can lead the world on climate resiliency and low carbon development. I'm aware that some countries in the region are already implementing climate resilient measures. It is imperative that policies which are long overdue are put in place now to build more resilient societies to cope with climate change in the future. Raising agricultural productivity, cleaner industrial production technologies, conserving land and forest resources, and planning more sustainable cities will reduce climate vulnerability and poverty. In each of these areas, there would be significant global benefits for climate change through reduced greenhouse gas emissions. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to now pay tribute to the bank for its unwavering financial support rendered to African countries in the quest to develop the African continent. I'm aware that as at the end of 2015, the bank gave out loans and grants amounting to $112 billion through 4,370 operations. In 2015, the bank approved $8.8 million loans and grants in 240 operations, mainly in infrastructure projects. This is exceedingly commendable, especially in the face of the current financial challenges that the majority of African countries are facing and reduced access to bilateral grants by most of our countries. An increase in risk aversion towards emerging economies has left us with few options, but the bank has been ably fulfilling those. The bank's vision for Africa, postured through the high fives that cover areas of integration, industrialization, powering Africa, feed Africa, and improving the quality of life, has renewed our hope that the continent will overcome the current challenges hopefully soon. With the implementation of these programs in the areas under focus, I am confident that Africa will have a resilient, self-sustaining, and well-linked economy. And I hope my confidence is not misplaced. Let us take advantage of the rebalancing taking place in China by being the next hub of industrialization. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to now extend my gratitude, like to you all, in advance for the admirable work to be done here during these 5 days meetings. I'm sure that meetings such as this will allow us to share best practices and exchange ideas on practical ways of tackling the energy crisis and indeed climate change. Let me also thank the bank for choosing Zambia for these meetings, and also express how honored we are as a country to host all of you. It is now my very, very, very rare and singular honor to once again extend a warm welcome to you all and to declare the annual meetings officially open. I thank you and I wish you God's blessings and a comfortable stay in Zambia. Thank you.
Je voudrais dire merci au président de la République de Zambie,
His Excellency,
qui a bien voulu nous honorer de sa présence.
Zambia, who has honored us by his presence and by declaring open this session of our annual meeting. This would lead us actually to the close of our ceremony. However, beforehand I would ask protocol and the security detail to assist our guests in making their way out, and I also wish to ask all of our guests to move to their next activity, which would be a roundtable on power or energy. And I also would like to remind you all that we do have a very busy schedule, and we are also invited to an official banquet, a function that is offered by our host, and it has to start on time because we do have another activity at 1500 hours, and I would like to, for our host to be able to go and attend the function that is offered by the President of Zambia. The national anthem, please.